ಇಬ್ಬಂದಿ ಇಬ್ಬಂದಿಯಲ್ಲಿಯೇ ದರ್ಶನ ಕಾಣೋ.
Hello, Shekhar Purna here. Today is July 16th, 2026. Subject: Literature and Cinema. Douglas Winston Garrett. I hadn't even finished the name. Who is he? The one who wrote that book Screenplay as Literature, right? Is it him? Murali Venkatesh asked, widening his already large, egg-sized eyes. Sitting in his house near the Syracuse University campus, I had no choice but to nod in agreement. Nobody here takes him seriously, he added. After all, Murali Venkatesh was a professor at Syracuse University, whereas I was someone who had stopped my schooling in the 6th grade at a primary school in HAL Vimanapura. I had to listen to what he said. Without stretching the argument or discussion further, I kept quiet. Murali Venkatesh was a sub-editor at Prajavani, Deccan Herald. I was a proofreader. I used to scribble a few articles, and when they reached his hands, he would look them over and publish them in the Evening Herald. Not just that, there was no one in the Prajavani Deccan Herald journalist circle who spoke Tamil. Being a younger, when Murali Venkatesh found out that I knew Tamil, he grew much closer to me. Over time, he went to America, did whatever he did there, and got established as a professor in Syracuse. My affectionate feelings towards him have not changed even a bit to this day. Whatever Murali Venkatesh's opinion might be on W. Winston Garrett's book Screenplays as Literature, there is no doubt that Garrett brings some highly logical truths before us. Shakespeare wrote his plays specifically for stage performance. Yet today, in famous universities worldwide, everything Shakespeare wrote reigns supreme as literary textbooks. Similarly, a screenplay is indeed a piece of writing done before filming, and lately, more and more of them are being published in book form. Why shouldn't published screenplays be considered a branch of literature? Structurally, Garrett's proposition can perhaps be boiled down to this single paragraph.
My madness for cinema was also one of the reasons why I dropped out of school in the 6th grade and wandered around like a vagabond. The constant tauntings from elders like he doesn't read, he doesn't write, would sometimes infuriate me. So, even if just for show, I started reading whatever books I could get my hands on. This is how the obsession with both cinema and literature caught hold of me. Literature is an addiction to reading, a medium of letters. When I start reading, my comprehension gets confined only to the letters. It begins to feel abstract. Grasping the meaning becomes difficult, and gradually the letters jumble up and become invisible. The visual medium is not like that. It stays in the mind for a bit longer. Because of this, the visual medium became closer to my heart. The experience of the visual medium would weave its way into my conversations and casual chats. Reading is laborious, watching is comfortable. Isn't this the reason why there are more cinema lovers and fewer readers? As the line between letters and visuals kept rolling and shifting for me, meanings began to unfurl beyond just the addiction. To escape the glaring eyes of my leftist friends, I would occasionally read S.L. Bhairapta's works in secret, while also adopting U.R. Ananthamurthy's flair, tilting myself toward the left. As Ananthamurthy encountered broader dynamics, including his family environment, Christian-Brahmin dualities, and India versus foreign countries, and as his works began to appear orientalistic to Westerners, the phenomenon called Ananthamurthy was born in Kannada. V.S. Naipaul's chapter A Defect of Vision from his book India, A Wounded Civilization becomes highly relevant here. I shall write about that sometime in the future. In cinema, Satyajit Ray brought a wonder from foreign shows and planted it in the soil of India's Bengal. No matter where the roots came from, his Pather Panchali remains an extraordinary piece of art to me to this day. Similarly, the film Ghatashradda, which Girish Kasaravalli made by taking a story born in the world of letters, is not only close to my heart but is also an extraordinary piece of art. Kasaravalli was a student at the Film and Television Institute of India, FTII, Pune. The influence on him, not just of Akira Kurosawa, Yasujiro Ozu, Federico Fellini and Michelangelo Antonioni, but also of Satyajit Ray, is vividly visible in Ghatashradda. Perhaps because this element stood out so prominently, an article titled The Pather Panchali Syndrome still lingers in my memory. It was written by my late well-wisher and guru figure, Professor T.G. Vaidyanathan, who critically noted that Indian films often look like a shadow of Pather Panchali. Whatever the case, for those obsessed with serious cinema, Kasaravalli's Ghatashradda stands as a masterpiece, and it is also a profound lesson for our younger generation. There is a lot to learn from it. Shekhar Purna.
You know that strangely universal experience where you pick up a highly acclaimed book, you sit down with a cup of coffee, and after like 10 pages, your brain just feels like it's pulling a freight train through thick mud.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it is a laborious physical chore.
Yeah, the cognitive load is just immense. You
Yeah.
are taking these abstract black squiggles on a page, translating those symbols into sounds.
Right. In your head.
Exactly. Forming those sounds into words, and then actively rendering entire fictional universes in your mind's eye. And you're doing this constantly, without a break.
But then on the flip side, you go to a theater, you sit in the dark for 3 hours watching this wildly complex, multi-layered film, and it feels completely natural, effortless even.
It really does. It's a totally different way of processing.
Right, and that invisible, frustrating line between the written word and the visual image is the heart of what we are unpacking for you today.
It's such a fascinating divide.
It really is. We are diving into a July 2026 essay by Shekhar Purna that just completely shattered how we look at this whole dynamic.
Yeah, it's quite a ride.
It's a wild ride through the cognitive science of reading, the brutal social politics of, like, what books you are caught holding, and how global cinema kind of hijacked or perhaps elevated local stories.
And what makes this text so compelling is the deeply personal lens Purna uses. We aren't just looking at dry theory here.
No, not at all.
We're looking at this intense tension between high academia and raw, lived experience. We are following a primary school dropout who evolves into a profound cinematic thinker.
Which is wild.
Right. His journey forces this complete reevaluation of our fiercely guarded definitions of what actually constitutes, quote-unquote, literature.
Well, let's start with Shekhar Purna himself, because his background really frames this entire debate for our deep dive today. Shekhar dropped out of the HAL Vimanapura primary school in the 6th standard.
Very early on.
Yeah. His formal education was cut super short. Now contrast him with his friend Murali Venkatesh.
Right, a total opposite in that regard.
Exactly. Murali is a former sub-editor at Prajavani in the Deccan Herald. He is highly educated and Iyengar, and he basically climbs the academic ladder all the way to becoming a professor at Syracuse University in the United States.
The power dynamic between them is just stark. But their shared history is uniquely human.
Yeah, tell him about the journalist days.
Well, back in their journalist days in India, Shekhar was working as a proofreader, right? And they formed a bond, largely because Shekhar knew Tamil.
Which was rare for them.
Yeah, it was a rarity in their specific journalistic circle. Murali recognized something in him, even taking Shekhar's little scribbled articles and publishing them in the Evening Herald.
Which is a nice connection. But fast forward to the present day in our source, July 2026. Shekhar is sitting in Murali's house near the Syracuse University campus.
Setting the scene.
Yeah, and this is where the core incident happens. Murali just dismissively brushes off an author named Douglas Winston Garrett, who wrote a book called Screenplay as literature.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Murali, wielding the full weight of his Syracuse professorship, basically states that nobody in academia gives Garrett any importance.
Right, just completely invalidates it.
And Shekhar, the 6th grade dropout sitting in a university professor's house, stays completely silent.
He just nods along.
He just nods. He feels like he has no intellectual standing to argue. But internally, he completely agrees with Garrett's premise.
And Garrett's core argument, the one Shekhar secretly supports there, it actually challenges the very foundation of literary studies.
Okay, unpack Garrett's theory for us.
So Garrett points out that William Shakespeare, right, he wrote his plays exclusively for stage performance.
Right, they were meant to be acted out.
Exactly. They were functional scripts meant for actors to memorize, block, and perform for a live, often rowdy audience. Shakespeare wasn't sitting there writing novels for quiet, solitary reflection.
No, he was trying to entertain people in a theater.
Right. Yet today, those same functional scripts are universally studied in elite universities as the absolute pinnacle of high literature.
So Garrett's question is pretty unavoidable then. If a 400-year-old stage script is high literature, why shouldn't published screenplays, which are just the written blueprints before a modern film is shot, why shouldn't they be considered a legitimate branch of literature too?
It's a really solid point.
Think of a screenplay like an architectural blueprint. We usually only care about the finished building, the movie. We walk through it, we admire the view.
Right, we don't frame the blueprint.
But Garrett is asking us to appreciate the blueprint itself as a work of art. The structural integrity, the pacing on the page, the vision before the concrete is even poured.
And it forces us to examine what actually elevates a functional text to the status of literature. I mean, Is it merely the passage of time?
Just because it's old.
Yeah, basically. Academia, as represented by Merle in this anecdote, resists this idea heavily. They maintain this strict boundary between the literary and the cinematic.
Why are they so protective of that boundary, though?
Largely because acknowledging screenplays as literature disrupts the traditional hierarchies of academic study. It threatens the established order.
Which raises a super important question for you, the listener. If screenplays are literature, does that mean the film director is just a translator?
Ooh, that's the big question.
Like, are they merely taking a complete literary text and converting it into a visual language the same way you would translate a novel from English to French?
That is the exact friction Garrett highlights.
Yeah.
Because if the written word is the origin point of the art, then the cinematic execution is secondary. It's just a translation or an adaptation.
Right.
But as Shekhar's essay reveals, while academics debate these theoretical boundaries of what counts as literature in their ivory towers, the reality on the ground is a much more visceral human struggle.
With how our brains actually process these two mediums.
Exactly.
Because Shekhar approaches this not as an abstract theory, but through the lens of his own life. He confesses that his absolute obsession with cinema is what caused him to drop out of school in the first place.
And the social consequence of that was just brutal.
Yeah, he writes about the constant taunts from elders, like, he doesn't read, he doesn't write. You can really feel the deep shame embedded in that.
That's heartbreaking, really.
It infuriated him so much that he began reading purely for show. He would just grab books to be seen with them in public.
But he found the actual medium of letters incredibly hostile.
How so? Like, what did he experience?
The text provides this fascinating look into the cognitive friction of reading. For Shekhar, letters were entirely abstract. He describes how they would become a jumbled, invisible mess in his mind.
Wow, just a mess.
Yeah, reading is explicitly described in the essay as laborious. We touched on this earlier. It requires this active, exhausting imagination. You're constantly building the world from scratch using nothing but alphabetical code.
But watching cinema, on the other hand, Shekhar calls comfortable.
Right, comfortable.
Because the visual medium stays in the mind longer without that heavy decoding process. It easily weaves into casual chats and everyday conversations because, well, the world is already rendered for you.
It perfectly explains why movie lovers vastly outnumber dedicated readers. It is simply the path of least cognitive resistance.
But wait, I have to push back on this idea that visual media is just a comfortable, passive experience.
Oh, how so?
If you are watching an intricate, deeply layered film, something highly symbolic that demands a different, equally exhausting kind of visual literacy,
That's a fair point.
you aren't just letting images wash over you, you know? You are actively interpreting framing, lighting, microexpressions, editing rhythms. It is just a different vocabulary.
And you know what? Shekhar actually reaches a very similar conclusion as he matures.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he writes about how his mind acted like a pendulum, swinging back and forth between the quote-unquote labor of letters and the comfort of visuals.
I like that pendulum analogy.
And as that swinging continued, he realized that the visual medium, when engaged with deeply, stops being purely passive. Deeper meanings eventually unfolded beyond just a mere habit.
So he learned to read movies, essential.
Exactly. He learned to read the visual language with the same rigor one might apply to a dense novel.
Now, here is where the essay takes a brilliant turn. Once Shekhar finally pushed past the sheer mechanical labor of reading, once his brain stopped seeing letters as a hostile, jumbled mess.
Right, once he got over that hurdle.
Yeah, he didn't just find pleasant fictional stories. He stumbled headfirst into a complex, highly tribal web of social and ideological minefields.
Oh man, the politics of reading.
Because reading requires so much visible effort, the book you choose to hold in public becomes a deliberate performance.
The focus completely shifts from the cognitive act of reading to the deeply sociological nature of what is being read. It's fascinating how these distinct political spheres use literature as literal tribal markers.
Yeah, Shekhar details his navigation of these literary politics in Karnataka. To avoid the wrath of his leftist friends, he had to read the works of the acclaimed author S.L. Bhairappa in absolute secret.
Almost as if he were handling contraband.
Literally. Meanwhile, out in public, he was adopting the intellectual flair of U.R. Ananthamurthy, who is a literary giant associated with progressive left-leaning thought.
And we should clarify for our listeners, we aren't taking any sides on the politics here. We're just reporting Shekhar's lived experience with these two camps.
Right, completely neutral on the politics itself. But for Shekhar, he even began leaning toward the left himself in his public persona just to fit in. Literature here is never just ink on a page.
No, it is a social passport.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What you are seen reading dictates your entire social standing and your ideological identity. A book cover is essentially a billboard signaling to your peer group exactly who you are or, who you are trying to be.
And the source material delves deeply into the phenomenon of UR and Anthemurthy's rise in Canada literature specifically.
What drove that rise?
Well, Shekhar points out that Anathamurthy's prominence was driven by very complex social dynamics, specifically the tensions between Christian and Brahmin identities and the friction between indigenous Indian realities and foreign intellectual influences.
Which is a heavy mix. And because of those specific dynamics, Ananthamurthy's work eventually began to appear orientalistic to Western audiences.
We need to unpack that term for a second because it is so central to the essay's critique.
Go for it.
Orientalism, in this context, refers to a framework where Western audiences view Eastern cultures through a distorted lens. They see it through exoticism, mysticism, or inherent backwardness.
Thanks.
So when a highly localized, nuanced Indian text is consumed by a Western audience, that audience often brings their own preconceived assumptions.
They miss the actual point.
Right. They might ignore a complex socioeconomic critique embedded in the story and instead just see this fascinating tale about, like, exotic Indian village life.
And Shekhar connects this directly to V.S. Naipaul's critique, specifically a chapter called A Defect of Vision from his book India, A Wounded Civilization.
A really important reference there.
Yeah, Naipaul's argument suggests that this distorted gaze doesn't just come from the outside. Sometimes the literature meant to explore local truth can become warped by the global lens looking back at it.
It reflects back on itself.
Right, and local creators might even start adopting that foreign gaze to look at their own culture.
And that collision between the local and the global, between authentic indigenous storytelling and the heavy influence of foreign structures, it wasn't just happening in literature.
It was happening in movies, too, right?
Exactly. The essay seamlessly mirrors this literary struggle with what was happening on the exact same scale in Indian cinema. Just as authors were grappling with foreign and local identities, filmmakers were experiencing the exact same collision of worlds.
Shekhar points to Satyajit Ray as the monumental figure here. Ray brought cinematic wonders from foreign shores and planted them directly into the soil of Bengal.
And the result of that synthesis was the absolute masterpiece, Pather Panchali.
Pather Panchali, yeah. Ray proved that you could use a globally developed cinematic grammar to tell a fiercely local story.
And the lineage traces forward from Ray directly to Girish Kasaravalli, who was a student at the Film and Television Institute of India, the FTII in Pune.
The FTII was huge for this.
Oh, massive. It was a crucial hub where young Indian filmmakers were suddenly exposed to the absolute cutting edge of global cinema. So Kasaravalli took a story that was born entirely in the world of letters and translated it, turned it into the extraordinary film Ghatashradda.
The massive global footprint visible in Kasaravalli's work is staggering. Ghatashradda wasn't made in a vacuum. It proudly wore the influence of global cinematic titans.
The heavy hitters.
Yeah. We are talking about the dynamic framing of Akira Kurosawa, the patient, low-angle observations of Yasujiro Ozu, the psychological landscapes of Federico Fellini, the lingering environmental alienation of Michelangelo Antonioni, and of course the humanist synthesis of Satyajit Ray himself.
And applying those specific visual techniques, like Antonioni's way of using empty space to show internal isolation, applying that to a deeply local Canada narrative is a massive artistic leap.
But with all those heavy global influences proudly on display, you inevitably run into a critique about authenticity.
Right, you can't avoid it.
The source highlights a sharp observation by Professor T.G. Vidyanathan, who wrote an essay titled The Pather Panchali Syndrome.
Okay, wait, what exactly is the syndrome? Like, what is he arguing?
Vidyanathan's critique argued that many Indian films were merely becoming shadows of Ray's work, or worse, hollow imitations of these foreign masters.
Oh, I see.
It asks a painful question for any creator. At what point does being heavily influenced by global masters stop being a brilliant, elevating synthesis and start becoming a syndrome?
When does it cross that line?
Exactly. When does it stop being genuine inspiration and start being sheer imitation, where you are just parroting the visual language of Fellini or Ozu without capturing the underlying soul of your own culture?
It is the eternal artistic tightrope, isn't it? Like, are you using a foreign tool to dig deeper into your own soil, or are you just paving over your soil to make it look foreign?
That is a great way to put it.
But Shekhar, he actually reaches a very firm resolution regarding Kasaravalli's work. He concludes that despite Vaidyanathan's broader critique of the industry's tendencies, Ghatashradda itself escapes the syndrome entirely.
It remains a towering masterpiece in its own right.
It does. It isn't just a shadow of his influences. For Shekhar, it stands as a vital lesson for the younger generation on how to take profound literary depth and merge it seamlessly with a global cinematic language.
Creating something that is universally understood but still uncompromisingly local.
Exactly.
Well, let's trace the massive journey we've just been on. We started in a living room in Syracuse with a sixth-grade dropout sitting in silence, intimidated by a university professor's rigid, gate-kept definition of what gets to be called literature.
And through Shekhar Purna's lived experience, we watched that definition break wide open.
Yeah, we saw how the written word and the silver screen are not opposing forces at all.
They are simply different mechanisms for the exact same human need to tell stories. One requires the heavy, active cognitive labor of decoding abstract letters into concepts, turning the reader into a co-creator of the world.
Right.
The other uses the immediate comfort of visual language to achieve that emotional resonance, bypassing the decoding process but still demanding deep visual literacy.
Both mediums are fraught with social and political landmines.
Oh, heavily.
And both are constantly caught in that fierce tug-of-war between local authenticity and global influence. It genuinely changes how you look at the next book you decide to read on the subway or the next movie you watch.
You aren't just consuming a story. You are engaging in a highly political, cognitively complex act of translation.
I love that.
But, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, extending the logic of this entire deep dive.
Let's hear it.
If, as Douglas Winston Garrett argues, screenplays are the literature of today, and a finished film is essentially a translated, fixed version of that literature where the visual rendering has already been done for you.
Okay, tracking with you.
What happens to literature in the age of interactive media, virtual reality, or AI-generated storytelling?
Oh, wow. That is fascinating.
Because if the viewer can actively step inside the environment and alter the story in real time, the definitive blueprint of the screenplay dissolves completely.
Blueprint is gone.
Exactly. Does the concept of fixed literature cease to exist entirely when the audience bypasses both the labor of reading and the fixed nature of cinema, becoming the real-time co-author of the experience?
Are we moving toward a post-literary world or just an infinitely more complex one?
It really makes you wonder.
The next time you put on a VR headset or play a deeply narrative video game, ask yourself if you are reading, watching, or doing something our academic definitions haven't even caught up to yet. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We will catch you on the next one.